So, hello and welcome to this webinar. A few things before we start, as usual. And the first one is that we will take a break within in half of the webinar, just a 5-minute break before we start again. You can ask questions whenever you like. You just type them in the chat box and I will answer them right away, most of them at least. The other ones we will go through in the end of the webinar. It will be recorded. I just started the recording, so you will have this recording sent out to you right after we finish today, and you will have it in your email. So that's sent out to you automatically, everyone who registered for it. So if you don't receive the link to the recording, please send me an email. So we are going to talk about search development, and I've updated the webinar a little bit with some new videos, because when I was watching the previous webinars, I thought it would be good to go a little bit more into details about some things. So it's it's a little bit changed since last time. But okay, we start as usual with an overview of detection dog training, and this goes more or less for tracking dogs also. So all the things that we talk about during this webinar will be something that you can use for at least for the preparations of your tracking dog. So it all starts with selection of dog, and I don't want to spend too much time on that in this webinar, but I still think it's important to say a few words about it, because it's, in my opinion, quite difficult to find a suitable, really good dog for single-purpose detection. And if you compare it to like an ordinary patrol dog for police, a dog who's supposed to do a little bit of everything, like biting and tracking and searching. But to do only detection, especially on a little higher level with for professional working dogs, it's difficult to find a dog who actually has the drive to do this intense search for full time. So what we are looking for there are dogs who can show us already during the test, whatever test we do. It's not formalized in that way, but what we're looking for when we test dogs for our own training is dogs who are easy to reward in general, but especially we are looking for dogs, in lack of a better term, but dogs who has a lot of the prey drive. And what we mean with prey drive in this case is basically dogs who are motivated to chase after the toy and grab it and keep it. And we will also see that it is possible to increase that motivation and that intensity. So we normally we want to spend some time, a couple of weeks, with the dog that we have selected to see that it's increasing also. And when we look at the prey drive and the motivation for playing, you have to look at things like speed and intensity and so on. And the reason why this is important is that in tracking and detection, the dogs are going to do things on their own, and we will like as much as possible to avoid that classic problem with handler influence. So if we can keep the dogs motivated with a type of reward that is not socially connected with us too much, at least, then it will be easier. And also easier because that type of play increases the value of the toy itself rather than interact with me, which means that the toy, after some play development, also has a value when it's not moving, but when it's still. And that's why we can place that toy out in the search area, and the dog will be motivated to search for it and also happy when he found it. So if this toy is only associated with having fun together with a handler, that is a different type of motivation that can be little bit problematic to use for detection training. We will go much more into details with more practical examples of this very soon, actually, because what I just talked about is a very important part of the search development, especially. So the reward development, and then when we have selected the dog, the reward development starts. And what we do is that we try as much as possible to increase that motivation for the reinforcer as much as possible. And this is an important part of the training, and it's important to do it enough before we start the search development, because it all comes back to how motivated the dog is. When we have that reward development done, then we start the search development, and that's clearly what we are going to focus on tonight. Search development goes in two phases. The first one is where we just kind of connect the play with the search, letting the dog search for the whole toy. In the next part of search development, we focus more on the detailed search. Okay, you don't have no sound? Are you the only one who can't hear me, or are there other people who can't hear me? Okay, well then it has to be something with your computer. So maybe try to turn off the sound and on again. But yeah, search development goes in two phases, and that's what we are going to focus on tonight. So we'll talk more about that soon. And then we have indication training, and that is something that we do when we have done the search development first, because what detection training is almost all about is to find the balance between motivation for searching and finding. So indication training is something that we do separately before we put the search and indication together. And when we have a systematic search development and indication training done, then we can start to apply these foundations in different types of systematic search. And somewhere along the way, in the end of this chain of modules, we do imprinting. And imprinting sometimes starts a little earlier. Sometimes we continue with systematic search on, for example, pieces of Kong a little longer before we do imprinting. So that is a little bit individual. But we never start the imprinting unless all of the foundations are done. So the reward development for detection dogs, I mentioned already a little bit about that, but we increase as much as possible the motivation for the toy itself. And the main technique behind that is through different types of chasing games. And there are several reasons for this, not only because of the toy itself, but also because it's clearly a type of drive and motivation that can create a little bit of another type of emotions and attitude that we can do in play by adding different types of tools like leash tension and so on. So we can create a little bit of a tougher attitude through play, and that's very useful when we train a detection dog. If we are able to keep the dog in that prey mode, that gives us the possibility to also do a very easy transition to go from chasing the toy to search. It seems like a almost seamless transition that comes naturally when the dog is in that prey mode to switch over to a search. And you will see several examples of this in the videos that I will show tonight. Play is also a very important fitness training. And for dogs who are supposed to work with high focus, concentration, and to do that a longer period, they need to be fit. And play, and especially the chasing games, are really good for fitness training also, not only a way to increase the motivation for the toy itself. And especially the type of play that we do with a flirt pole, this long pole with a rope with the toy attached to it. With that type of toy, we can do very intense play. And the good thing with this is that it's not only a part of the play development, but it's a combination of fitness training and play. So the question used to be, when do you stop doing these chasing games? And the answer to that is that we never stop it. We continue to do this all throughout the dog's career. And that two reasons for that: continue to build value of the reward, but also for fitness training. Another good thing that we can get from chasing is the focus. And the prey drive triggers the focus. The dog waits for movement. And that principle of waiting for movement, keeping focused, is the foundation for an indication, a passive indication, but also the foundation for a start signal. In both those behaviors, we want the dog to focus forward. And this is something that we can actually train through our play development. So this is like a classical question. Do detection dogs need hunt drive? I would like to answer that question by saying that you can train almost any dog. Sorry, is there video playing with sound to the rest of you? I haven't shown a video yet. The only thing with sound is my voice now. So, So, yes, you can train any dog to do detection. The difference is to what level. And I mean, you can teach a dog all the different skills with low intense reward systems and so on. But I think it is important to be clear that for more advanced and more difficult type of detection, or detection is supposed to be over a longer period of time, we need strong rewards, and we need something that can motivate the dog, even though it's a tough challenge. And I think that's easier to create through play rewards. So, but it doesn't mean, of course, that you can't train a detection dog with other types of rewards. But based on my experience, I think we need that strong motivation that detection dogs, that prey drive can give us. Okay. Okay, so we will take a look at these chasing games, and the principles for them are important also to keep in mind when you do the search development and indication training. So the distance between the toy and the dog is crucial. The closer we are able to keep the toy during the movement, the more it will trigger the prey drive. So we place it close to the dog in the start, but we also try to keep it close so the dog really feels that he has a chance to capture the toy. So distance is really important. The further away from the toy, you will clearly see that the dog starts to lose speed. The movement of the toy is also very important, not only during the actual play, but you will see that the same movements will be used also in the search training. So we want to keep that prey alive. We want to avoid this social tugging because then the dog will focus more on me. But if we keep the toy alive by doing very unpredictable, quick movements with the toy, that will increase the strength of the grip, and the dog will be more eager to keep the toy. Of course, it's important to use a type of toy that is comfortable to bite in, because another important principle of the chasing games is to steal the toy, because stealing will create extra value, and the dog will be more eager to catch it if we steal it. We end the session when the intensity is still high by leaving the toy in the training area, and this is a the motivational part of it, because it's different when we start the play development. We want to use that effect, but later on, play is, like I said, a part of the fitness training. So then we push them even further so that they are exhausted when we stop sometimes, because it fills another purpose there. So if you do chasing in the way that I described, and I will show a few examples of, and then when the toy disappears, then you can just ask yourself, what will happen with your dog? Where will he pay his attention? Well, if the play is focused around the toy and to catch the toy, and the toy all of a sudden disappears, that's how you can get that search mode and the transition from play to search. But if you do tugging and a lot of that social interactive play, the toy disappears, most dogs will be very passive, and they will just look at the handler and wait for the handler to deliver the toy again. So that can, of course, cause problems when we train detection. So this is the reason why prey drive is so important for detection dogs and tracking dogs. I will show 3 examples of chasing games, one with food, one with a flirt pole, and one other with just a toy on a rope. And the difference between these 3 exercises is just the type of reward that we are using. So the food rewards are obviously lower speed, lower intense rewards, but we can practice the principle of chasing also with using food. Then we can practice the movements, and we can practice the principles both for the handler and for the dog. And by doing that, we can also prevent injuries because we prepare the dog physically for what he's going to do on higher speed later on. So this chasing game with food is the first exercise that we do in the play development, and it looks like this. So that is one example of chasing, and the principles are the same for the rest of the exercises. It's keeping the dog busy with trying to catch that, in this case, piece of food in my hand. We're looking for speed and also focus, because if the dog isn't too engaged in this type of play, he will miss the piece of food. So what we want to see from time to time, from session to session, is that this focus and the speed increases. When we introduce the toys, we do that in the same way, and there are several steps in this, but the principles are the same. We place the toy in front of the dog and we want him to chase after it. This is an exercise that we are using the flirt pole for, and as you can see, it's a leather tug that we use here, because the leather is softer and than the Kong, for example. So it's a good toy to start to introduce the chasing games with. And when the dog catches the toy, we can, try to steal it, and we can do that without harming the dog. And this is a dog who's done this several times, but the sessions are much shorter, of course, in the beginning. With the dogs that we have in training and on an operational level, we do this for 20-30 minutes full speed without any stops. But in the beginning, they will be exhausted just by a few minutes. So this is flirt pole, and it can look like this.
Holding without losing the toe. Yes. Oh, no.
So what the purpose with this type of training is, of course, to just increase the value of the toy. But as you saw, this was a leather tug, and it's this is possible to do with any type of toy, but it doesn't really matter as long as you are able to try and steal it without causing any problems for the dog. You can see a few examples here where the dog were focusing a few seconds before the toy were moving. And that's actually the beginning of the indication training, but also the beginning of the start signal for the detail search. And this is also where we condition the leash tension. And the leash tension will be very important for the search development. If the dog cannot handle the leash tension without taking it as a restriction or taking it as something that means stop, then we will have big problems doing some of the exercises that we need to do to increase the intensity in the search development. So this is the perfect exercise to do that by adding a little bit tension first in the start, but after a while also during chasing. And then we will condition the tension to mean keep on moving forward. The focus is also, of course, in all dog training important because it kind of saves energy and direct it towards the task instead of just wasting it on being frustrated. So with adding small elements of focus in play development, we can also increase the intensity of the play and the reward without causing that stress or frustration. But like I said, it was a leather tug in that exercise. Another type of toy, familiar for most of you who have been in the detection training, is Kong. And I would like to first of all say that Kong is sometimes called the Kong method. In my opinion, the Kong has nothing to do with the method. You can use several different methods and still use Kong. Kong is just another scent target odor that we use before we imprint the dogs on the real target odors, because it allows us to do mistakes and it's easier to handle logistically. We can hide pieces of Kong on several places without, it's not a big catastrophe if we hide it in the pizzeria and forget it. It's worse with drugs or explosives. But also, and I would say that's the main idea behind using a Kong for foundation training and detection, is that value, that motivation for the Kong that we can create through play development and reward development is easy to transfer over from the Kong to the real target odors when it's time to do the imprinting. But basically, you could use any type of toy to this. The important thing and the good thing with Kong is the material itself, and that is that you can cut it in smaller pieces and gradually increase the intensity of the dog searching and sniffing frequency. And the material that Kong is made of is just good material. It just happens to be good material because you can cut it into micro pieces and it's still not falling apart. But many years ago, I did the same principle, but with the tennis ball instead. So by that means, it doesn't really matter what type of toy you use. The idea behind it is just to use the toy with a high value, cut it into smaller pieces, so the dog kind of looking for and reacts like he finds his favorite toy, even though it's just small pieces. And by doing that, we can make the dog search more intense and with higher frequency. And then when we build the motivation up for the foundations like search, development, and indication training, we can just apply those foundations on the real target odor. And by doing that, we have saved some time, just because it's easier to handle also. But it doesn't mean that we train all dogs on Kong. We have some dogs that we train right away from on the target material. Some other dogs that we are training on another type of toy, but it follows the same principles. The chasing games continues now from flirt pole to the actual reward that we will use in training. And in this case, it's a Kong on a rope and the same principles that you have seen in the food games and in the flirt pole, but now with the reward that the dog will have in training later on. Let's see, do you use an out cue once the dog has captured the tug, or is it the end of the session for a young dog? Now you steal it. And this is a technique that you learn through the chasing games, that if you pull hard enough and at the right moment, you should be able to steal it if you have a little bit of a good timing. But what we do in the beginning is that we wait for the dog so that we can see that he kind of loosens the grip, and then we quickly steal it. So that's the principle. If we would have used the out command every time, it wouldn't it would be a little bit counterproductive, because the purpose with that type of play is just to increase the value of the toy and to also increase the strength of the grip. So stealing is a very important part of that. Out is something that we train 2 steps later, when we have done chasing games, we have done the social tugging, and then we train the out also as a separate exercise, a separate separate behavior. The chasing can look like this, and if you look now at the chasing, you will see that this type of play is exactly the type of play that I start after a while to mix with a search. And there you could also see leash tension and leash tension in the beginning, but also sometimes during the actual play. And after a while, we start to add even more focus and practice more what we call active passive. So in this type of play, the dog is clearly very active, but when we train the indication, we want the dog to understand the principle of active passive, which means that when the toy is moving, we want him to continue to chase it. But when the toy is still, the dog should also be still and stare at it. And that's how we train the indication behavior, and especially when we do sit and stare. You will see a few examples of that in this webinar, some of the videos, but otherwise, that full indication behavior is something that we train after the search development. But during the search development, we do some parts of the indication training, and especially when it comes to the focus part and the distance to the hide. That's something that we can pre-train already in the search development. So all of this play creates motivation that we really need to have before we start the search. Because if that toy isn't really fun, or if it's fun but not that fun, well, why would the dog search for it? So it gives the dog a reason to search for the toy, and it gives the dog a reason to search for it for a long time. And again, this is why it's important to build the value of the toy itself, and not only when it's moving. Because if I place the toy out somewhere in a search area, the dog is searching for it, and when he finds it, he gets kind of disappointed because it's not moving. So this stealing part and this twitching that we do when the dog has catch the toy, that is what builds the value of the toy itself, even though it's still. And that is very important when we take the next step in the search development, where that toy has to be valuable. And also, it gives the dog a motivation and a reason to do things that we have to, that the dog really has to be able to do in a real type of search. That can be jumping, climbing, crawling, and things like that. And that type of toughness is, during the search development, completely built on the value of the toy. Because when we hide it in different environments, that toy has to be value enough for the dog to handle that kind of environmental challenge. So the first part of search development, like I told you in the beginning, search development goes in 2 phases. The first phase is the kind of the easiest phase in one way. That's where we just let the dog search for his favorite toy. And in the beginning, we actually do that in the same place every time. So with my puppies, for example, I have done the play development in the same room every time during the first months. And what happened with them with that is, of course, that we create the contextual learning, so the dog learns to expect all fun to happen on that place. And as you all know, that can be a problem, but it can also be something really good in the beginning, because if we change environment too early, the dog is many times he will be more interested in what happens around him, and that will has a negative effect on the play and on the toy. So if we do this the same place every time, the dog will start to be familiar with the distractions that are there, but also he already knows what will happen when he gets there. So that allows me to build up a really, really strong motivation that in the next step I can change to different places much easier. So the search development we do every day. In the beginning, I just start with throwing the toy out in high grass, for example, let the dog see it the first time, just running around and grab it. I want the dog to be reinforced out in that search area. The dog should expect that the reinforcer is out in the search area, not with me. Here, I also want to look at the dog's attitude when he grabs the toy. Is he grabbing it with the full mouth or just with the front teeth? And that gives you valuable information about how the dog perceives the environment and the situation. So if he's very confident and just grabs the toy, well, then clearly has no problems being here. But if he hesitates to grab it, remember, it's his favorite toy, but he still has some issues with grabbing it. Maybe he's affected by things happening around him. So the grip itself will give you important information. Many dogs need some time to do this. So jumping over this phase and go straight into indication training or brick wall search or whatever it is, or lineups, can be a big problem, because you might think that your dog is doing really well, but it's based on these simple skills. But the problem will be much bigger if you later on see that, yeah, he knows the different skills, but he cannot even jump up on a desk. So search development phase A is like preschool for a dog. And to have an idea about how much we do this, so with my puppies and with the young dogs, I do it every day. Now we have gone into the detailed search much more, because they have done a lot of play development for search development phase 1, where they have been searching for their toy. One session every day, normally. Later on, might be 2 sessions every day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, but every day. And when I see that the dog immediately starts to search for his toy when he's in there, in that room or on that place, then we can start to train the same thing, but in different environments. An example of it can look like this. Here is a very good example of how the dog's motivation for the toy makes her so motivated that she can't really stop trying to get the toy, even though it is in a complicated place. And another example, the same dog, but in another environment. Yeah, good question. In these videos, is the dog watching you throw or place the toy, or is the dog taken away while you hide it? In the beginning, let's say the first 2 or 3 times, I can just throw it. But after that, they already know what to do in that place and in that environment. So then I have placed it in advance. So I placed it in before we get there. So in this type of training, you don't care about how the dog is searching the system. It doesn't matter if it's just running around. We don't care about the technique. And what I mean technique is how the dog is searching, high sniffing frequency, closed mouth, and all that. It doesn't matter, because this is not really a search exercise in that matter. It is just a way to connect the play with the search, to get the dog to use the nose to find the toy. You saw that the toy that I was using here was a Kong on a rope. And every time the dog finds the toy, I don't want them to hesitate at all, just grab it. So that moment when the dog grabs it, that's when he gets his reward. So when I do this type of training, I use the Kong on a rope, because then it's easier for me to communicate to the dog that this is your toy. Since I will use Kong also for training later on, and at some point I want them to indicate on it. And for doing that, I use when I want to make a little bit more clear distinction between Kong as a target over and a hide, I use ones without the rope, and when I use it as a reward, I use it with the rope normally. Not always, but normally. You could see that the dog was scratching and biting and whatever. And what is important to realize is that the more crazy the dog is to capture that toy, the more he scratches and biting and aggressive on the hide, the easier it will be to train a passive indication. And this is a very common mistake, that people see this and they think that, oh shit, I will have a lot of problems with the indication if I allow this, and then they start to train the indication instead too early. Don't care about that. The more crazy he is, the easier it will be to train the indication. And the reason for this is that all of that scratching and being that crazy is because that toy has a high value. And that high value will be very easy to transfer into focus and train the indication later on. So the indication is not a problem at all. So yeah, don't hesitate to do that type of exercise, and don't look at it as an exercise to train the indication or to train the search system or anything. It's just drive building, nothing else. In the next phase of search development, we will focus on how the dog is searching. And just to give an idea about when it's time to start up that training, and to give some kind of idea about what to expect from the first part of search development, we used to recommend that make sure you are on a level, an average level, where your dog can search for the toy for at least 20 minutes without any kind of clear loss of intensity, or that he's starting to do other things. But then we can see that he's doing a directed search for his favorite toy for at least 20 minutes without any stops. And that is the average level. And we can see that he doesn't hesitate to jump up on things and clearly is not distracted by the environment. Then we can enter the next part of search development. An idea about how long that takes and what to expect. It's a little bit difficult to say, because it depends on the dog's background, but also the age. The thing is that with the puppies, I can do this, every day, search development, and I come to it normally comes to a point where I have to do both search development phase 1 and phase 2 with them, just to vary their training a little bit. But if you have a young dog and let's say 8 months or 10 months or 1 year or whatever, I think you have to expect to do the type of search development phase 1 normally at least a month, more or less every day to get to that point. Because it's not only the searching aspect of it, but also the mental stamina and the mental stamina and the fitness aspect of it. But yeah, 15-20 minutes, and then I know that, okay, now it's time to start up search development phase 2. And what we're doing now then is to start the training towards a detailed search. And a detailed search is when the dog search with high sniffing frequency, closed mouth most of the time, at least as a general technique. And this is something we do on a leash to begin with, because we want to limit the search area is one thing, but also the leash tension that we condition during chasing games will be a very important part of the principles for search development to increase sniffing. So if we use Kong as an example here, and go back to the 2 previous parts of the training, play development, search development, and we have now used the Kong. What we do now is that we want to transfer all this motivation into smaller amount of sense by using smaller and smaller pieces of this toy, and reward with the same type of toy. So the dog is finding this small piece of it, and he associates it with the favorite toy, and that's also what he gets. How small amount of sense that you are training on, or what you are trying to reach for, depends on the end goal. At the moment, I'm training digital evidence detection dogs searching for different type of electronics and data storage equipment. That type of material consists of metal and things like that, smells very little. It's just a very small scent picture. And for those dogs, we have to prepare them all the way down to not even pieces of Kong, but just residual odor from Kong and contamination from it before we start the imprinting, which means that not all dogs will be suitable for that. For other dogs, you don't want to go that small, because it can be that can make them too sensitive. So you have to adjust it towards that purpose. We'll talk more about how to actually do this in practice. So, for example, how quick you should go to smaller pieces and so on. But what we want to get here is the high sniffing frequency and the closed mouth, so that the dog learns that that is the best way to find these scents, these target odors. We can look at a detailed search, typical search on a brick wall, and then we will look at a detailed search just in another environment. On another object, in this case just a chair. So that was examples of detailed search. And when do you need this detailed search? Well, I will give a little bit of a background to it first. Are you using a terminal marker before you give the dog its reward in these videos? No, I never use any markers in this training. And I don't do it in indication training either. So it's just delivered in front of the dog. And then later on, you have other reward rituals where we deliver the reward in safe ways, but we don't use a marker for it. And there are several reasons for that. And I still have the indication webinar if you're more interested in that, because it will take too much time to go through that in this webinar, unfortunately. Sniffing frequency. Yeah, when there are different types of material, different substances, but also concealed hides, where the dog basically has to have the nose straight over to be able to catch any odor from the hide. What is important to understand is that the sniffing frequency itself will not make the dog more sensitive, but it reduces the risk for missing hide, especially in high speed. So if the sniffing frequency is too low, the dog can take several steps before he sniffs again. And if this is a hide that is well hidden, or if it is a substance that smells very little, then the dog can easily miss that hide. So we can avoid that with two things. One of them is, of course, to create a search pattern, which makes it possible for us to see where the dog has been in the search area. But the other thing that we can do is to increase the sniffing intensity, so that the dog, even in quite high speed, will be able to catch the odor, basically because he's sniffing more often. This is something that we have to combine with fitness training. And some of the dogs that we train who are doing very demanding detection training for up to 6 hours every day, working with very high intensity, what they do is that they normally work like 20 minutes and then have 5-10 minute break to recover. And their ability to recover comes from their fitness training. So that's why it is very important to combine fitness training with detection training, so that they are able to work also with this high intensity for quite a long time, actually. And of course, in different weather conditions also. But what you can do to practice that early on, already from the foundation training, is to connect the fitness training at an early time by, for example, do a short treadmill session before you start the search training, and to gradually kind of train the dog to use this high intensity sniffing when they are already physically, sometimes even exhausted. So that is a good way to train them to use their nose effectively, and to find that kind of rhythm. And that has been shown in studies, and we have seen it also that all dogs have this possibility, but they had to be exposed to it. So that comes from the combination of fitness training and search development. So after the break, we will go through how to start up that detailed search, and look at some videos. So yeah, see you in 5. So, welcome back. When we start up the detailed search, and the end goal is to have this high intense search, focused search, closed mouth, high sniffing frequency. We can't start with small amounts of scents. We have to gradually go that way. So when we start, we use the chasing games again, and we introduce this in the context where we are going to do the basic training of the detailed search. So for example, if I have a room and I also have the bricks and the brick wall in that room, I do all the play development in that room, so the dog already builds up the expectations of that place, and he will also start to pay attention to the bricks around the walls. And then I can also do search development training in there. So when I start up the training for the detailed search, the dog is already familiar with the environment. So now I want this wall, and as you saw in the first video, it's a brick wall, and the brick wall is a good type of search type detection equipment because all of these holes, so which makes it easier to create the continuous sniffing compared to scent boxes where the dog is going just from box to box. So it doesn't really increase the sniffing intensity like we can do on a brick wall. A wall is also good because we can stay behind the dog when he's searching. Since we haven't trained the full indication yet, we have to be quick with the rewards, and we have to stay out of the way so the dog doesn't start to look at our movements or our position. That's the reason why we're using the wall. In the beginning, we play close to the wall, and we just place the toy in the wall, pull the dog away, let him go back, and use the combination of chasing games and tension on the leash to build up the expectation of the actual wall. We want to keep the dog's focus and attention toward the wall all the time, so how we are using the tension is very, very important. We start with just playing, teasing the dog all the way to the wall, pulling the dog away while I continue to move the toy with a rope on the wall and let the dog go and get it. Eventually, we place the toy in the wall, pull the dog away, let him go back and get it. Next step, we place the toy in the wall and pretend to hide it on different places. And then instead of sending the dog in front of the wall, straight to the wall, we send the dog from the side. So now he will start using the nose to find it, but still find his favorite reward in the wall. Just like we did in the first phase of the search development, but then the search area was larger. Now it's the same principle, but the smaller area. We always end the session with placing the toy in the wall, pull the dog away, so that he remembers that his favorite toy is in the wall. So the next time we go there, the dog is already motivated to get to the wall. So that is the main principles. The equipment that we use for this. First of all, I'm really not interested at all in fancy equipment with collars and leashes, and I really hate those big collars with cobra buckles on it. It might look good on pictures, but I really don't care about that. I just want collars and leashes that are good for the practical training and the mechanical movements that I use in dog training. So what is important for me is that I can actually feel the dog through the leash and the collar. And I also want it to be really comfortable for the dog. So I try to use really light, quite soft, ordinary flat collar without any kind of what do you call it, like prong or with any kind of choke function. Because we use the leash tension so much, so it needs to be a nice association with it. I don't use it as a correction. The leash is the same. If it's too long and I do play chasing games in front of the wall, it's like easy that it gets wrapped around your feet. So I don't want any handles on the collar either, because that handle is too heavy. So when I do these quite technical exercises, I just want the possibility to be flexible, so that I can just move my hand along the leash using as much tension as I like, and not getting wrapped around my feet with a leash. So and also you can see many times that when the dog is leaning forward, these kind of heavy collars, it doesn't look like it's very comfortable. So I want the dog to feel comfortable in the collar that I use. So that's the basic equipment. Besides then the actual reward. But then I've talked a lot about brick walls. But what I actually use in the first part of the search development phase 2 is not the brick wall, but a stone wall or a pile of wood or something similar. And the reason for that is that in the brick wall, it's impossible, not impossible, but almost impossible to hide the whole toy in a very good way. So it's easier to place the whole toy, and it's also easier to place it deeper if I use something else than a brick wall. So I normally go from the stone wall or the brick pile of wood, and then in the next step to brick wall, not until I have increased the intensity and I can start using pieces that are small enough to hide between the bricks, so that I can start the search there. Later, when we use smaller pieces, then you put them in the holes, of course. But all of that, the big pieces and the whole toy is easier to use on use like a pile of wood or stone wall for. So we can look at a video of a session where I, with the puppy, go from not all the steps, but a typical play development or search development session where I start with just giving the dog the toy in the wall a couple of times, using movement, playing in front of the wall, connecting play and search in a very simple way. But there are some details that I want you to pay attention to. And one of them is when I'm placing the toy on the wall, I try to get the dog as close as possible. If this is the toy and this is the wall and this is the dog's head, I try to get the dog as close as possible to the toy before I pull the dog away, because that will trigger the dog much more than if I hold the dog over here and the toy is on the wall here. That will very often create a distance, communicating to the dog that you're not allowed to take it. So that's why it's very important to be flexible with the leash, so that you can adjust depending on how much tension you need. But I try to get the dog as close as possible. But also what you can see is that I have a constant tension on the leash a little bit, so I don't have no tension at all, and then all of a sudden there is a stop. So the dog should work through the resistance through the leash tension, not being corrected by it. I do a couple of repetitions with the whole toy, and then you can see that I have placed a bigger piece in the wall, and now then I reward with the toy. And what you can also see is that when the dog finds, I reward quick, but I also sometimes pull the dog a little bit because I want to see how much motivation the dog has. If he immediately goes back, that means that the size of the piece is good. So it looks like this. So there you can see like all of the different parts of the foundations coming together. It's chasing, it's the leash tension, it's the focus. And let's say I hadn't done the chasing with the leash tension and I started to use it in this exercise. Well, then the dog would take it as a correction and then he would not go back to the hide. So all of these things are part of the drive building aspect of the search development. So what I want from that exercise is that when I go towards that area, when I go towards that wall, I want the dog immediately to start pull me there. And when I can see that he finds the hide and wants to stay there and just push toward the hide, that means that I can start using smaller pieces. What I then want is the same reaction, the same drive towards the hide, and try to keep that same level even when I go smaller and smaller and smaller. So I want the dog to react like he found his whole toy. And that's what I try to keep through all the steps when I make the piece smaller and smaller. Just like we did in the search, in the play development phase, we leave the toy in the area, and in this case, in the wall. Here you see, by the way, a pile of wood. And the end of the session, after the dog had done a few repetitions of search, find, get the reward, we leave the toy in the wall, exactly in the same way that we did with the flirt pole training. And the reason for that is, of course, that we want to use that memory when the dog gets there next time, and the increased motivation that brought. Yeah, so that's how the session ends. Not every time, but most of the times in the beginning. But an important thing there is that if we pull the dog away and we have gone like 5-10 meters, or if we go almost halfway to the car or home and the dog still is pulling, well, then let him go back and grab the toy. So you don't always like pull him from there, but you do it now and then to keep the motivation. The wall, whether it is a pile of wood, brick wall, or whatever, I've talked about this a little bit earlier. The handler's position is really important. We should try to stay and move straight behind the dog. So if this is the wall and this is the dog, and the dog is like that, searching along the wall, then the handler should be placed there so that we have our own body position straight behind the dog, even though it sometimes feels a little bit awkward when the dog is searching along the wall and we are standing there, because very often we end up here feeling that we are behind the dog. But the important thing is that if the dog looks, he can see you. That's why we have to be straight behind the dog, and also walk and move constantly so that the dog doesn't start to cue our stops. This isn't that important later on, but it is really important in the beginning, because this is now we condition all of the basic principles for the dog. So hopefully he will be less sensitive for this later on, or he will be less sensitive for that. But in the beginning, it's important to not build ourselves into the picture. So we keep our position. And this is why I really don't like scent boxes and things like that, especially early in the training, because it's almost impossible for many handlers to stay behind the dog. So instead, they will stand in front of the dog, and the dog finds handler reward, the dog looks at the handler. It's really causes more problems than necessary. So always do the search development on a wall so that you can stay out of the picture. It will save you a lot of issues and problems later. The dog has the expectation somewhere where the reward will come. So when we reward and we are straight behind, we have to look on the dog to see if he expects the dog on his right side or left side or over the head, whatever, and then place the reward from on the other side, so that we don't confirm that the reward will be on the side where we are standing. So we need to be prepared to reward from left or right side, depending on the dog's position. The optimal way of delivering the reward, and the direct rewards that we use, throwing and all of that, is a way to keep the dog in that prey mode and to get that extra intensity that we can get from throwing. And when we throw over the head with that type of movement, it will be almost impossible to reward quick, because first we do like that, and then we throw, and then the dog will start to predict that, and you will soon have a dog who looks up. So try to learn and throw with this type of movement, even if you're throwing high or from the sides or low, but reward this, because then the movement will be much shorter and there will be a quicker reward. I normally try to reward a little bit under the hide, under the target, because over will most of the time create this expectation over their head. But if you throw under, it's not that important exactly where you throw, because the dog will not start to look down for the reward to come there. It's just more forgiving to reward under. And also, it's not very nice to get a really hard Kong in the head. So throwing over the head is something that you should avoid in general. The handler's position. Again, it's behind the dog. And you should try to position yourself so you're straight behind the dog by just moving constantly. And move so that you are prepared to reward from behind. Depending on the dog's angle, it can be from the left or right side. Just move constantly. Stay out of the dog's eyes. And there I could see that the dog expected it to the left, so I rewarded from the right side. Take a step behind. Always move. This dog isn't very sensitive for my movement anymore. It's much more important for new dogs to do this. Some more principles for the brick wall work, or the wall work in general. Play close to the wall so that you're not taking several steps away and play with the back against the wall, because you want the wall to be where the dog expects everything to happen. When the dog does something that you don't want him to do, look away or indicating too early or something, never do full resets where you ask the dog to come to you and start again on your side. Always use the leash tension so that you can still have the dog's attention toward the wall. If you have a dog who has to come up on your side every time during this foundation training, soon you have created more expectations on obedience or on being together with you instead of on the wall. So the leash tension is also here really important. That's why we call it a half reset instead of a reset, because a full reset would be that we say, give the dog some kind of signal, non-reward marker, telling the dog that that was not right, you get another chance. That's not what we want to use here. We want the dog to be eager to go back again by just using a little bit tension, so that the attention still is toward the wall. In the beginning, we don't use the tension in when the dog finds the hide. Instead, we want just a quick reward for the very first reaction. So as soon as we start to use targets smaller than the whole toy, then we just quickly reward from behind. We want to reward a movement forward. Some dogs has this tendency to move their head back and almost naturally have a freeze indication. And if we start to reward that, it's really, really easy that they start to think that that's the head movement that we are looking for. So the search is not in focus. So instead, we want to reward the movement forward when the dog is still active, so that we gradually or for every repetition reward the dog's search intensity rather than being still. The indication, like I said several times, comes later on. The goal with this exercise is just to reward the dog for finding, so that the sniffing intensity goes up and that there is a clear connection between searching and finding and get the reward. If the dog's first reaction to the hide is to turn the head around and look at you to get the reward, that means that you're using a too small piece. So if you're using Kong, for example, well, then go back to use a bigger hide. There are two types of leash pulling that we use. The first one is just a little gentle pulling, so that I strengthen the reaction. And the reaction, strengthen the reaction comes in the next step of the training. First, we just quick reward, no tension at all. But in the next step, we start to use some gentle leash tension so that the dog gets that opposite reflex, so he moves forward. And that's how we create this strong reaction. When I just use the leash a little bit, you should aim for, and it's not easy, but you should aim for a situation where the dog's nose still touching the hide, even when you're pulling. So you're just making his body a little longer. And then when you let go of the tension, the dog moves forward, and that's when you reward. So that type of tension, that gentle tension, is something that we use when we want to strengthen the reaction to odor and to stabilize that reaction when we come to the next step and want to kind of train the indication more. When we pull the dog away from the wall more, so that he loses contact with the wall, that's something we do when the dog is scratching, or if he loses focus, or if he's doing other things. Then we remove the dog from the wall and then immediately let them go back again, and quick reward for going back to the hide. So if we look at just the first part of rewarding the reaction, sometimes the reaction is very small. Some dogs have a really strong reaction, and then it's easy. For some other dogs, the reaction is very short and you have to be really quick. But since we are using so big pieces in the beginning, you can just assume that when the nose is there, over that big piece, he has the odor. So a quick short session with quick rewards can look like this. And what you will see then is that from repetition to repetition, the intensity will go up with these quick rewards. If I would train duration and long indication, the search intensity wouldn't go up because the dog would start to expect that what pays off is just to be passive. And that's what we want later on. But we have to start with increasing the search intensity, because otherwise we will have a dog with low intensity and too much expectation of being still. And that will not be a very effective way of searching. So is the dog being put away in between each time you hide the toy, or do you have a helper who's hiding it for you each time? I actually hide it on my own. I will talk about that just soon. But what I do normally is that the dog has the toy, and I continue this twitching, so I keep the dog busy. And then with my other hand, I change position of the hide. So when I add the tension on the leash, what I do in the first step is to tension on the leash when I see the very first reaction to the odor. And then I pull a little bit so that the dog gets almost like a magnet to the hide. And I do that because I want not only to strengthen the reaction to that target, but also to prepare the dog for a more precise indication. Because the first part of the indication is, of course, focusing. If I train the sit and stare too early without the leash tension, many dogs will take a step back or several steps back and sit down and focus on the sit. So this is how we can train them to be more precise without getting that like too relaxed sit. So a session of that can look like this. So before the dog decides to sit, but when the nose is on the target, tension before the sit, so we get that movement forward, and then the dog will have a more precise indication. Examples of using leash tension for two things. With this puppy, it's now time to, this young dog is now time to kind of stabilize that reaction a little bit. So we have done a lot of dry building, using a little bit leash tension, dogs moving forward, and I reward that. Now he has this tendency to use the front paw, and now I want to get rid of that. So you can see two examples of leash tension. The first one is the little bit more gentle, where I just stabilize the dog to get him still before I reward. Sometimes he wants to put his paw up, and then I pull him away longer from the wall, and then back again, and then I reward. And that makes it possible to get rid of things like scratching or biting or something in just 1 or 2 sessions. Try to do that without the leash tension, and you will have much more difficult to do that. So there you saw actually everything in the same session where I mix some resistance to leash tension exercises where I just throw the whole toy on the ground, let the dog pull there, and reward when I can feel that he's getting closer. And then I can use the same principle there on the wall, and I can continue to pull the dog back and forth without getting them passive or making them stop. And that is because of the play development and the resistance to leash tension. That gives you that possibility to fix the possible issues with scratching or whatever without breaking down the motivation, because the leash tension is practiced and trained through play. So the starting point, you can see that when I start on the wall, on the brick wall, it's very often that I see handlers starting on the left side every time, with the result that the dog runs somewhere else. Be a bit careful with that, because what happens is that you kind of destroy or ruin your start signal. For the detailed search, you want the dog to start exactly where you tap or where you point or whatever start signal you have. But if you always start on the left side on the wall and then allow the dog to run to the right or somewhere else, then that start signal will not give, it will be irrelevant for the dog eventually. So if you want the dog to start from on the left side or whatever, you have to be consistent to take the dog back if it goes somewhere else. Or you can look at the first part, or this part of the search development in another way. Because when you start the search on the wall, it actually doesn't matter how the dog is searching. You are just behind the dog, and the dog should learn that the hide can be anywhere. So don't ask for a pattern. That comes in the next part of the training, what's called systematic search. Then we start from left to go and goes to right. But then we are not behind the dog. Instead, we are in a blocking position next to the dog, moving backwards, and the dog will follow us in that direction. So what I used to do, instead of starting the dog on the left side on the wall and ruining my start signal, is that I always start on the old hide. So in the beginning, we use these big pieces, and that's the perfect moment to tell the dog that he shouldn't care about the contamination or the old hides. So you can use that difference between a big piece and the residual odor from the old hide, because the difference is so big and clear. So if the dog stops and investigates that old hide, you just wait and you let him continue on his own. You don't give him any information. When you're using very small pieces, that's not possible to do that, because then the old hide can smell more than the actual millimeter piece. So then you have to clean the wall or remove the brick or something. But what I want to come with this is that when you start the dog, you can use that old hide. So, and to get a really good start. So what I do is that the dog is searching, he finds the hide, I reward, I remove the hide, and then I have this residual odor, and that's the point where I start the dog the next time. So then I tap on that one, give the start signal, and then the dog will already be curious and sniff there. So by doing that, I can get the sniffing intense start, and at the same time tell the dog that the old hides will not pay off. So that's something that I do during the first part, at least, of the search development, when I use big pieces. And when I mean big pieces, you can get that effect when they are, if it's Kong, we're talking about down to a couple of centimeters or 1 centimeter. That's still very big. When we are on millimeter or micro pieces, very small pieces, then if you place a piece of Kong in the brick wall, it will leave a lot of residual odor after a while, so that the new hide maybe smells less than the old hide. And then like I said, you cannot. You have to be much more careful there. Multiple targets or only one hide. That depends on the dog's drive and stamina. I rarely use more than one hide. And the reason for this is that I spend a lot of time on the drive building part of the training. So I rarely have a dog who give up if he doesn't find anything really quick, even not the puppies. So what I do instead is that I start the dog closer to the target instead, if I need that. And I don't use the whole wall, for example, in the beginning. And also, you have to be careful with multiple hides, because it can, especially for dogs who already have a lot of kind of good stamina, then many hides can be almost stressy for them. So I prefer to use a bigger piece of Kong, for example, instead of multiple hides. But sometimes, of course, you will have dogs who need multiple hides to make it more likely for them to find something. Brick wall routines, I've already been into that a little bit, but how to handle the Kong pieces, if it's Kong we are using now or whatever toy you're using for the foundations. When I train on small pieces, when I am gone through the first part of the search development, where I use bigger pieces, then I can use my fingers and just move it. When I use smaller pieces, then I use boiled pieces. So I boil them in hot water for a couple of minutes, because I want to teach the dog to search for Kong and not touch Kong. So it's very easy to train them to indicate on a combination of Kong and human scent. So what I do is that I start to train on boiled pieces, but then when the dog is kind of what we could call imprinted on Kong, then I also train on touched pieces, so that the human scent becomes more like a distracting odor and not part of the conditioning. I prefer to have my wall outside so that I can wash it with water between the sessions, and that actually helps most of the residual odors. But and you can do that in the middle of the session or after the session. If I train a dog for someone where it's really important to keep track of that, then I actually remove the whole brick. When the dog indicated on the piece of Kong, I remove the whole brick, I wash it with water, and I let it stay out and dry before I put it in again. There are a number of different types of bricks. Unfortunately, in Sweden, we are not able to find the best ones, because I think it's due to the climate that it's what I've found is that the bigger and deeper bricks with different size of the holes are easier to find in Germany is the closest, actually. So we have these thinner bricks, but otherwise there are a number of different types of bricks, and they are the deeper you can find, the better, because it gives you more options when we train on different. When you train on this type of search development, the next step is to place them deeper, and then you put the hide from behind instead of that, and then you can make the hide much deeper and more diffuse scent picture, and that is, of course, has a bigger effect if you have a much bigger block, bigger brick. When you have done a detailed search, especially when we are have gone further on in the training. So when I train on a brick wall with an operational dog, again, we are up on like 10-15 minutes without finding anything, and that is a way to train to give them stamina, of course, But then it's also good to do like a stress release afterward. So what we do is that after the session, I take the leash off and then I just throw the toy for 5-10 minutes, just simple, high intense play. And there are studies showing also that doing this type of really intense play after they have learned something new, or if they have been highly concentrated, it seems to have a really good and positive effect on that. So that's more or less part of my routine or ritual when I've been training intense search, to always end with a session of play. So it's also on the brick wall that we condition the start signal for the detail search. And the start signal for the detail search will make it much easier to transition from the brick wall to another type of object if we have been planning for how to condition it. So when we go from the brick wall to another object, normally it's very easy. It doesn't cause any problems at all if I have been really aware of my start signal instead of just letting the dog go. But also the distance, of course, will make it easier for the dog to understand. So I start really close on the new object. I use my start signal. And just to make it clear, we just do a short search first and a quick hide, so the dog can transfer the foundation skills that we have created on the brick wall to a new object, because you recognize all of them. What if we put the odor in tiny glass test tubes to prevent contamination of the bricks? Yeah, you can do that. But at the same time, for most dogs, I want them to be able to handle the contamination. So I want to expose them for the contamination, residual odor, and it's only a few dogs where we need them to be that sensitive, so we even want them to indicate on residual odor. But for the other ones, it's actually often a bigger problem if they are not used to work through that contamination. The start signal for the detailed search is more complicated than you might think, because the signal itself can cause different levels of intensity. You could see that sometimes I pull the toy away, and that's a start signal. Sometimes I just have my hand there and tap with my finger. Sometimes I just touch the wall and slowly take my hand away, but it's all different variations of the same thing. It's my hand being still, or it's the toy being still. And since the dog is in prey mode, he will wait for that one to move, and I can do the movement with my finger or a much higher intensity with the toy. What I can do with the start signal is that I can create the focus, and I can also make the dog close the mouth. So if I see that the dog is a little bit frantic or hectic or not focused, then I can move my hand in front of the dog, just a little slow, in front of the dog, close to the wall. And when I get still, the dog will normally pay attention to it, and then I can tap. So I can create a better better chances for the dog to get the focus start with my start signal. And when I later on condition the start signal, I do that in two ways. One, the detail search, one for the detail search, but that I just explained, having the dog close, tap, and so on. But I also have another search hand signal for larger area or for a less defined area, where I don't want the dog to get stuck on the same place, but instead going forward. And what will happen then is that if you have established a detailed search as the foundation, you will see that even in an area search, the dog will have a more effective technique because he's using the nose more intense. So the last video here, you can see same dog, two different start signals. One for the detailed search, which allows me to start the dog up on anything, and then another start signal where I use my hand in the direction where I want the dog to go, and the search intensity makes the dog able to find small amount of odor more effectively, even if the speed is high. So the goal with the search development is to increase the motivation for searching and not training the different skills that you need in detection training too early. Search development and the drive building aspect of it takes much longer time than to train an indication. And to train the dog to search in certain systems also takes much shorter time than building drive. So that's why this type of training is so much more important. And then it's time to train the indication in parallel to this. When the dog is able to search for a longer time without losing the intensity, there are exercises that you can do separately and at the same time, but not in the same session, that prepares the dog for the indication behavior. So then once it's time, it's easy to put them two together. But this is definitely the most important part of all the things that you can do with the detection dog, because the drive that is built through these exercises will make the dog less sensitive, and it allows you to do basically more mistakes, actually. And it is something that reflects the real work of a detection dog later on, where he actually will search more than he will find and indicate. Does the sit aspect of the indication happen organically with the leash tension, or do you cue it? No, it's trained with luring in the beginning, and then you train the sit by movements over the dog's head, for example, to begin with, and then gradually lower and lower down. For those of you who are interested in the other webinars, they are possible to purchase almost all of them, for example, the indication training also. We also now have a course about indication training that is available, where we go through indication training in practice, all the steps, and how to connect them with the search later on. And there will be more courses similar to that also in search development. Yes, so I would like to say thank you, and good luck with the training. If you have any questions, you can of course just ask them. If you have questions later on, you can just send me a message, and I will try to answer. Thank you. Thank you. All the videos are available on our YouTube site, at least most of them. Yes, we have an imprinting webinar also. I just had one a couple of weeks ago, and that one is available. Yeah. Okay, yeah.